Welcome, everyone. We're really glad to see you tonight. I'm Amy Antonucci. I'm a board member with New Hampshire Peace Action, and I'm going to get things kicked off here tonight. This is our New Hampshire Peace Action Peace and Justice Conversation series online, March 25, 2024. And our topic tonight is going to be New Hampshire Peace Action's work. Recent work, ongoing work, what we're looking forward to, including hopefully getting some thoughts and ideas from you all. We're also definitely going to be doing some introducing to you of our new director. New-ish, he's not brand new at this point, so maybe he'll already have some reflections for us. We will see. So for over 40 years, New Hampshire Peace Action has been educating, mobilizing, and organizing to build a more peaceful and just future for all. A future that's based on cooperation instead of competition and conflict, where mutual benefit and shared security lead to a more peaceful and just global community. In that spirit of respect, we do like to start by acknowledging that we are doing our work on Nidakina, the traditional ancestral homelands of the Abenaki, Pennacook, and Wabanaki people. We honor with gratitude the land and the waterways and those people who have been in relationship throughout so many generations. Quick reminder on our Zoom guidelines, we love when you keep your video on. We do have you muted, and there will definitely be time for interaction, and you can just use hand raise the feature, or depending on how big we get, you can try to wave at me. But usually the reaction button, hand raise, is the most clear and easiest for me to spot. So tonight, there's a few of us here to speak with you. As I said, I'm Amy Antonucci, and I am the president of the board. We also have some others with us. We're going to be speaking about our recent work, such as forming the new New Hampshire Coalition for Just Peace in the Middle East, ongoing work going on through the Palestine Education Network and the Peacekeeper Project, our expanded legislative agenda and engagement, our educational programming, and meeting our new director. We will definitely do a lot of Q&A. You can use the chat. We'll have time for raising your hand, and we'll be asking you for your ideas at points. So with all that said, what I'd like to do is start by telling you a little bit about Tim. Wave, Tim. But actually, while we're waving, Bill, give a wave. Bill's active with Peacekeeper Project and some other things. He'll talk to us. Who else have I got here? Janet is here. Janet, want to give a wave? Janet is with the Palestine Education Network. I see Hayden has joined us, so I'm hoping he'll speak a little bit about our legislative engagement and how much it's grown. So those are a few things that you'll hear about tonight. But again, let's start with Tim. So some of you will remember, will have followed our journey, that about a year ago, we announced that our longtime director, Will Hopkins, was going to be leaving us in the fall. And that happened. September 15th, I think, was his last day. And we went through a pretty extensive process of surveying our members about what they were looking for in a new director, talking amongst ourselves about what we wanted, doing an outreach process, a bunch of, interviews, etc. And in the end, we hired Tim. And I think you can unmute yourself. I'm going to start just by having Tim say hi to you and a little bit about his background, maybe starting with your education and your travel. Might be a good thing folks want to know about. Go ahead, Tim.
Well, thank you, Amy, and thank you all for joining tonight. I want to preface a little bit that I'm not being humble here. I'm being very nervous. I don't like to talk about myself. I don't. I've done it in the past in various um, arenas, I guess. And prior to this position, I'm fairly new to Zoom, which I'll get to in sort of my background. Um, so this is a little bit different for me, to say the least, but I'm getting used to it and getting comfortable with it. But if I seem a little awkward, it's partly because I'm nervous, partly new to this medium, I guess. So yeah, as Amy mentioned, I started late January, so coming up on 2 months already. And in terms of my background, I would say I have a varied, sort of a diverse background of a lot of different interests, and a lot of different hats I've worn, which also means a lot of different jobs in different parts of the country, a little bit international. Um, and a lot of it has sort of circled around an interest that I broadly identify as history and American foreign policy, and American, I guess, real history that I think we all know. And my own background, I'm originally from Iowa, and grew up in Iowa and Colorado, product of divorced parents who got along really well. And so part of the transition of moving to Colorado when I was young was going to an alternative public high school in the suburb of Denver. And it's something that is very formative for me. It was a very liberal, uh, literally nicknamed Hippie Happy High. Um, and it's very fond, both in my formative years, but also the friendships I made. And specifically with this job is how much specific to the interest I have that connects, I think, to this position, is the amount of travel I did at a young age that was very theme driven. So for example, going to Berlin shortly after the wall came down, when I was 13 years old, going to the Pine Ridge Nation, Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota, and learning about the history and also doing service work. Mississippi Delta, similar, history and service work and music. Colombia, shortly after Pablo Escobar was assassinated with U.S. involvement, I guess I could say. And my teachers at the time were very, well, they would be, or they are, in fact, peace action affiliate members in other parts of the country, and some Vietnam veterans, and majority of them were anti-war veterans, anti-war activists. I also went to Belfast when I was 16 years old, and really got into trying to learn and absorb Northern Ireland history and Irish history, and specifically in the mid 90s, the peace process that was slowly underway at that time. And then I went to college, and my focus was sociology and history with sort of I guess it was a thesis or a capstone project that was specifically on Native American activism and the American Indian movement in Minneapolis and Denver, and sort of what became of it into the late 90s, early aughts. And then I kind of pivoted. Like I said, I have a lot of little interests. I pivoted and went to grad school for African history. So I did a foreign studies program in Ghana as part of an undergrad, and really got interested in both modern African history, but also the methodology of sort of deeper history. And I went to grad school in Madison, Wisconsin, where I met my now wife. She was also in the history program in Madison. And for those of you that are familiar with Madison, it's a very activist town, a wonderful town. And I was living there when George Bush had all his follies. So I was involved in the peace movement, at the local level, but also those sort of pre-Iraq invasion protests that we were a part of in DC and New York. The RNC was somewhere, I don't remember, but a lot of activism in the mid-aughts. And then I got kind of jaded by it all. And then I left, not about the peace movement, but about just America. And I traveled for a bit. And this kind of continued my interest, I guess, in U.S. foreign policy. I went to Vietnam for the first time in 2005, and I've been there a couple times. And went to South Africa. Spent about a couple months in South Africa, and in my mind, South Africa, Vietnam, and Palestine, Israel are sort of the three areas in terms of a historical sense and a very contemporary sense. I find both fascinating and also quite nervous about trying to figure out how I have my own position based on my understanding of the history of those regions, and of course, U.S. and Western involvement in that, both long term and more recently. And then I kind of became I got into the labor movement primarily after my interest in the labor movement came from volunteering and working on political campaigns, and then doing work in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. So I worked for the Laborers Union for 4 or 5 years, mostly in New Orleans and also out west, and mostly in California. And broadly speaking, it was sort of blue-green alliance work, climate justice and green job work. And that evolved into doing some coalition work, specifically in Colorado. So that was both California and Colorado. I started doing a lot of coalition work, both blue-green alliance is kind of what we called it, and then legislative and electoral coalition work, primarily on seeing what some folks call community benefits, that tax dollars, if they're going to be spent, they go to good wages, sustainability, and things like that. So a lot of piecing together different groups to find common cause. And then I moved to New England, and I moved to New England because I was in love with my wife, and she got a job at Dartmouth. So that was a big transition. I decided to take that leap, and moving here 15 years ago almost, I did a couple years of community organizing here in the Upper Valley with the United Valley Interfaith Project. But my heart and my interest to some extent was in labor. But also my wife's position meant that we were going to travel. So I went back to California and did some organizing in California. And then we settled in Vermont, in Chelsea, Vermont, got a little Vermonti farm, and I worked with the State Employees Union, Vermont State Employees Association. And that was for about 5 years. And then we started having kids, and then we lived in Ghana for 5-6 months, which is where my wife's work is based out of. Then we lived in Chicago, then we lived in London, and then COVID happened. So for the last 3 or 4 years, I've been kind of piecing a variety of things together, including being a father, and doing independent research and also research here at Dartmouth. This specific position, the reason it interested me so much was coincidentally, to some extent, I was at a pivot point in both my kids getting to a certain age and us settling in Hanover. And as I started, October 7th happened, and not a surprise that, it's an unfortunate thing that happened, but it wasn't a surprise given my understanding of the conditions over the last, especially 15 years, but much longer in the occupied territories. And that prompted me to say, okay, I think I want to get more involved in this. And I started doing some reading, because Palestine and Israel has always been a topic that I had at arm's length for a variety of reasons, which I'll gladly discuss. But I think Amy asked me to mention one book that I read that I finished it on the bus as I was going to visit my father, who is in the hospital and who has since died. So that's another big transition in my life. But the book is called what is it called? The Haifa Republic. So the Haifa Republic, I don't have the author's name. I apologize. But he's an Israeli philosopher, and it's a book that is short and succinct, and he has a position that maybe not everyone agrees with, but it was pretty eye-opening in his optimism. And the optimism for me was simply seeing parallels in his argument about the future of Israel and Palestine that I see in South Africa and other parts of the world, where a movement needed to happen for something to end, and then tied to that movement was what we can maybe call, hopefully, restorative justice, truth and reconciliation, specifically in South Africa. We've seen it in Northern Ireland, or Ireland, if you prefer. So those kind of pieces started coming together, both what I call my personal interest and my intellectual interest. I have academic friends, I read books. My professional skills were around organizing and coalition building, primarily for labor. So this position and this time, this moment, I guess, sort of combined those two things for me. And therefore, I pushed ahead and applied for the position and was interviewed a few times. And here I am. So, like I said, it's awkward for me to talk about myself, but I will say, part of my interest, and I can definitely dig deeper, is, a general interest in history, which is both the kind of Howard Zinn version. Obviously, for me, history that picks apart American exceptionalism, on the positive and the negative. And yeah, I still like good old-fashioned history about war and about conflicts. And not to glorify it, but to know it. I was fortunate, obviously, I said I've been to Vietnam a couple times. American military adventurism is a key piece in an American going to Vietnam. But I also spent time with my grandfather in Europe. For him, going back for the first time, he had served in World War II in the Battle of the Bulge, and I took him there when he was almost 90 years old. The U.S. Civil War and the issues of slavery and African American history. I'm quite I don't want to say knowledgeable in, but familiar with and interested in. And the conquest of this continent and Native American history is something that is always at kind of the basis of my historical interest. So that all said, I've been sort of viewing this position as a way to merge my interests and my personal and my intellectual background with more of my skills as an organizer and working in coalition work. So that's my long introduction, I guess. I hope that was helpful.
I think that was very helpful, Tim. Great job.
Thanks.
You didn't need to be nervous. Yeah, that was very helpful. And I'm sure there will be more questions. Hayden found, Hayden and I put some links in the chat so you can find out more about that book, The Haifa Republic. And I think that what I'll do next is actually get a little bit into some of the work that we've been doing around the time that you joined us, and actually starting a little bit before that. But part of what's been happening for New Hampshire Peace Action is that after Will left, we kind of thought we were going to have a quiet period where we really focused on finding a new director and kind of doing some groundwork sort of things. And then October 7th came around. And immediately, instead of taking a break, really many people in the organization stepped up in a new way, saw that really our activism was deeply needed at this moment. And I, for one, am really pleased and proud of the fact that so many folks, stepped up. Quite a number of you are here on the call. And it's been, I think, a really good demonstration of, I don't know, what we're capable of, even when we don't have a specific, leader. And while we're really glad to have Tim and someone to kind of help organize us more with that as his focus, it's been also a really, I think, an absolutely heartbreaking time. I think it's demonstrated some ways in which we were stronger than we thought. Anyone else here agree with that? Some of you were part of that, so I hope you all feel good about it. And let's talk a little bit about that. I think what I'd like to do is actually start by having, we're going to skip around time-wise here, and I'm going to have Bill say a little bit about the write-in ceasefire campaign, partly because that is what was happening when Tim started. His first week, we pretty much sent him around the state delivering signs and really jumping into kind of the politics of New Hampshire, that sort of, something that we're known for, that kind of engagement on that level. And Bill, are you able to unmute yourself? I'm not sure I can help you out. If not, if you want to say a little bit about that campaign, and if you need me to set the stage a little bit more, I can, but why don't you take it and see how it goes?
Sure. Thanks. Glad to be here with everyone. So chronologically, what happened was that back in December, some of you might remember that Andrew Valinsky wrote a letter to the editor to the Concord Monitor, basically suggesting that people write in ceasefire in the Democratic primary. And then in, I would say, mid-January, I received an email that was talking about the ceasefire campaign. And we, of course, had been organizing at that point for a few months, vigils and, almost daily call-ins to our elected representatives and really everything we could think of doing to call attention. But the idea of writing in ceasefire had not necessarily occurred to us. So, I kind of seized upon the idea and brought it to the Peace Action Board. And it took us a couple of days for us to kind of figure out what really was going on. Once I contacted the ceasefire campaign, they were really looking for someone to be the fiscal sponsor. They really had no organizational sponsor in the state of New Hampshire. They're just some people really from mostly out of state, not including Andy Valinsky, who wanted to make this campaign real. So to the credit of the Peace Action Board and to Tim, who was not even, he was hired but had not started yet officially, we put together a very, very quick campaign. And literally, I would say 6 or 7 days before the primary is how quickly the campaign had to come together. We were able to get 500 signs printed, some banners to put out. We had a great media team of people who were working on trying to get as much media attention as possible. And so we just kind of pulled together as quickly as we could anything we could think of to get people to know that ceasefire was an option. That, we had a write-in campaign, as everyone knows, that was kind of bizarre with, the Democratic Party ignoring the primary and Joe Biden not being on the ballot and him ignoring us. I think that was really the key thing for us, is just the frustration of contacting the White House over and over again and our congressional representatives and seeing no action whatsoever on what was going on in Gaza, and just hearing the death toll going up week after week. So this gave us something to do that was concrete. And so lo and behold, we ended up getting incredible international coverage, national, international coverage. Just really, I did at least 10 or 12 interviews from everyone from Al Jazeera to The Nation to, when we had Andy Valinsky doing interviews and other people doing interviews. It was very, it's kind of under the guise of peace action, but wider. We connected with Vets for Peace and really everyone we could. And as you may know, we got 1,500 votes. 1,500 people wrote in ceasefire on their Democratic primary ballot. Another 34 Republicans wrote in ceasefire on the Republican ballot. And what happened over the next couple of weeks was that I was contacted by people in Washington State and in Michigan, and spent some time on the phone helping to just give them some idea of what we did here. And there were very successful write-in campaigns with, different circumstances, because we didn't have the same situation with the Democratic Party kind of abandoning the ballot as we did here. But several other states, including Michigan and Wisconsin and Washington State, all had sizable, much greater responses to people writing in non-committed or ceasefire or something else. It really kind of took off in ways that we hadn't expected. So, and I really, want to thank the Board of Peace Action for taking quick action to make sure that we could respond to this. And, I think if we had another week, we could have probably increased that number from 1,500 to, 5 or 10,000. I would say there was a lot of interest, a lot of people being frustrated that they didn't know about it. To be clear, we tried really hard to get the New Hampshire media to pay attention to it. And other than NHPR, we could get no coverage before the election. After the election, it was, oh yes, and Arnie and in-depth New Hampshire. Thank you for bringing that up. So yeah, it was a really great campaign, and I didn't move the needle one iota on the horrible situation going on in Gaza, but it did, connect us to more people to be out, be involved in our vigils and being committed to this campaign and helping to strengthen the coalition that we had built, and making sure that, people understood that we have this right to exercise our vote, and that the Biden administration hopefully got some kind of message out of it, particularly because of the cascading effect of it happening here and in other states that had more time and more people to get organized with it. So I don't know if there's anything I missed that either Tim or Amy want to fill in, but that was pretty much what happened in the campaign. I also wanted to recognize Andy Valinsky, who really did a lot of work with us for a few days to really make sure that every media request was honored, and that we could talk to people, and that we could really spread the word as much as possible. So
Thanks, Bill. That's great. Tim, did you want to add anything to that, or can I? Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to add, I mean, I think it did make an impact, a small one, but the first in the nation primary and all that. I think maybe it planted a seed, or it just got the ball rolling, but we've seen it, especially in Michigan and other states. And it was just kind of a clash of quick campaign culture with a very important message. And sometimes campaigns don't have a good message, especially if they're trying to elect a candidate. So I think it gave us here a good cause to vote on, and it maybe created, or at least contributed to that becoming something that other states saw as something that's possible and normal. So, and it may continue given the situation. So, and I just want to call out Bill for doing a wonderful job and leading it and helping me transition into the position with that ceasefire campaign going on. So.
Thanks, Tim. Doug seems to have a question. I'm gonna make it possible for him to ask that. Did you, or were you just given a thumbs up? Maybe it was a thumbs up.
Doug did put something in the chat, so maybe he has a comment about that.
Yeah, I was trying for the thumbs up again. New Hampshire, I thought, did quite well on very short notice, and certainly lit the flame maybe for Michigan and some of the other states. And finally, you started hearing Biden and Harris start to at least talk about ceasefire, which they would hesitant to even mention before. So when they saw that many ceasefire write-ins, I think they started to worry about losing another one of their voting blocks. So that got their attention. Good job.
Thanks, Doug. And I do also want to mention that yes, we had been, and we'll tell you more about the other work, the legislative work, the vigiling, the stuff that is incredibly important and will be ongoing, but it was getting almost no media attention. And this campaign was shockingly well covered, and I think was a good lesson in like how something a little different and creative can really capture attention in a new way. So that was important. Including, I think, was it 3 papers in Israel, Bill, that carried the story?
Yeah, yep. And I was interviewed by Haaretz, and we had a media person who formerly worked for NHPR who did just a really terrific job on organizing the media for this, and that really made a massive difference.
So some lessons learned. And now actually I would love to call on Hayden. Hayden connected with us this summer over his work on the peace in the Korean Peninsula. And we were so impressed with him and the great work that he is doing in the world that we asked him to work with us some. And he was in between jobs. That's I think ending. So I think he's going to be doing focused on some other things, but he's been an incredible help for us this fall and winter, having a weekly legislative alert, which was always our goal, but we did not always meet it. But we knew it was just one of these moments when we had to meet it. And I can't imagine how much less sleep I would have gotten if Hayden had not appeared and done so much work with us. And Hayden, do you want to speak to, oh, sorry. There you go. I'm going to ask you to unmute. There you go. And talk about that.
Sure. And thanks, Amy. Yeah, since I believe October, I have been writing most, but not all. There have been others, including Tim, who have been writing legislative alerts throughout this whole time, and Doreen. But trying to tackle how we can approach Congress and other levels of lawmakers over the situation in Gaza, as well as other places around the world, but with most of our attention right now focused on Israel and Palestine. I think one of the biggest challenges has been trying to write action alerts that were, I think, fairly inclusive for all the people who follow New Hampshire Peace Action, making sure that we were sensitive to where a lot of people were coming from while being able to stay united around our core demands, which were permanent ceasefire, unrestricted humanitarian aid, and eventually conditioning U.S. military aid to the Israeli military over what's going on in Gaza. And there have been a whole bunch of myriad of bills, and I know that sometimes they can get a little bit repetitive. I do apologize if you're on the mailing list and I've had to deal with very similar action alerts week in, week out over things like the Ukraine, Taiwan, Israel security supplemental or UNRWA funding. But we've been trying our best to stay on our toes and make sure that people are able to speak with our congressional delegation, which I think someone else would probably be speaking on this, but in order to complement the work we've been doing on the ground as far as vigils and protests in New Hampshire. So that's been what I've been up to for the past few months. I have also been, it was nice to be able to engage with that work during that time I was unemployed. I have been working for the American Friends Service Committee since January, although I'll be leaving that job next month to move out of New Hampshire. But it's been good to weave together a lot of that work and also to connect with other things like the ceasefire effort. That scramble was one of the more hectic weeks I've had in a while, but it was also good to be active and to be doing something. I guess another thing we've been able to incorporate into the action alerts is some of the local efforts that we have been doing outside of lobbying Congress. So I know that in New Hampshire right now, we're dealing with some anti-BDS legislation at the state level that's aimed at trying to crack down on businesses that do participate in boycotts of Israeli apartheid. And we are trying to stop that bill right now. I believe it's passed the state Senate, but it is on to the state House where we're hoping we can block it. As well as trying to support a lot of these municipal ceasefire resolutions we've seen around New Hampshire. I know we've had successful passages in Durham and in Lebanon, and that we have, even though we've faced some defeats in Portsmouth and Manchester, we do have active efforts underway still in Nashua, and I believe in in Dover, both of which are going to be addressed this week. So keep on, keep an eye out for this week's action alert. But I guess in sum, it's just been nice to be able to combine all those things together. And while I'm sad to be leaving, I know it's in capable hands with Tim or whoever picks it up next. I know that Tim is a much better action alert writer than I am. Last week's was all his making, so I know that they'll be in good hands, and I hope that they'll continue to be useful for rallying our action. And I know that we might have some more lobby meetings coming up potentially this April. I don't know if someone else will be speaking to that, but um, a lot of good things are coming together. And with that, I'll pass it back to Amy.
Thank you so much, Hayden. And you've done an amazing job, really. I can't tell you. Though, I will echo what you said, that for a lot of us, we were putting in more work than we had really dreamed of doing on this fall. But at the same time, it was exhausting. The idea that there was something that we could do, I know, was incredibly important for me. So I'm glad I think a lot of us have gotten that out of this time period. There is a lot of, I'll say some about the caution, but first, actually, I want to introduce Janet. This is a sort of larger level. Janet Simon has been a part of educational work through the Palestine Education Network and other groups for decades, has made multiple trips to Palestine. She is one of the folks who has spent decades refusing to not talk about Palestine and Israel. And I think one thing that I feel I have learned the past 6 months is that there is a different level of interest, of openness, of engagement on this than I had realized. There had been a shift that I hadn't even noticed. And I'm sure it's for a lot of reasons, but I think one of the reasons is people like Janet, who, again, despite being yelled at and screamed at and having very, very nasty things said about her, kept on. And I'd love for her to speak a little bit about the Palestine Education Network and anything on around this that she'd like to. Hi, Janet.
Hi.
Oh, and let me also say that Janet was also the person who, on October 8th, when we started getting calls about interviews, and none of us knew who the heck who did interviews anymore, Janet stepped up and was interviewed by, I think, WMUR at least, was willing to go on record, have her video out there, and be our spokesperson as we waded into this. So we're so grateful. And where'd you go? Oh, there you are. Go ahead, Janet.
It's just been phenomenal to see people who have been on the edges step up to the plate and take the risk to speak out their truth and to learn more. It's a difficult process because I, for one, grew up in an atmosphere where Israel was heroic and practically worshipped, and it wasn't until 1981 that I learned otherwise and had the opportunities to help people see the whole story. So when I moved here, Penn was already alive and kicking, and Betsy Kelly got me right in. And together we really worked hard. Penn needs some new members. But it's been very encouraging to see people willing to see. And I have to put in a plug for April 3rd movie, because the movie last week with Yusuf Aboudi was just incredible, and the discussion with Yusuf. And on April 3rd, we have 2 short films, and Yusuf will be there, and Ayman Najim will be there. And it's an incredible experience to have these conversations.
Thank you, Janet. And I will quickly speak to part of what has been going on. Part of what we've been doing is pulling together, the folks you've heard from today and others of you here, like Cora and Chris, and there's Wes, you can't see him, but a lot of folks who have been coming to this work that is actually coalescing now as the New Hampshire Coalition for a Just Peace in the Middle East. The name had many conversations. That's where we ended. It's long, but we feel appropriate. And it involves groups, New Hampshire Peace Action is one of the core kind of initiators of it. AFSC New Hampshire with Maggie Fogarty and others. The Community Church of Durham, David Grishaw Jones. And then lots of other folks, Palestine Education Network, Jewish Voice for Peace, Upper Valley for Palestine. We've had some connection with through Hayden. Seacoast Peace Response, Veterans for Peace, Wes is here. FCNL. Lots of folks who have decided that this is important. It's time to talk about this and have some real sustained effort to have at least this tragic moment can spur us to a new level of action that has been needed for a while. We have the vigils going on, weekly ones in Dover. Those are always in front of a legislator's office in the middle of the day. It's not convenient for everyone, so they're not huge, but we made a decision that we wanted to be there at a time when they could not say, oh, we didn't know you were here. So we are outside of Chris Pappas's office one week, Jean Shaheen's the other. We go back and forth. We tried to involve Maggie Hassan's office, but her Portsmouth office doesn't turn out to have staff in it, so that didn't work out. But we go back and forth between the two of them, and every week we go in with documents and letters, and especially letters to the editor. Anyone who writes a letter to the editor, we print those out and bring them to our reps' offices and have some interaction with the staff. From that has also grown multiple meetings with the staff people, the DC staff members of our legislators, not Annie Custer. It's a lot of us have been in District 1, so it's been a little harder to get that one going. But we have had 4 meetings with the staff of Maggie Hassan's office. Now I can't remember, one with Shaheen's, and at least one with Chris Pappas's. So we are, this is more legislative work than New Hampshire Peace Action has done in a few years, and we're on their radar at a different level. And it's hard to tell, what kind of change is happening. We're frankly a little bit shocked. Well, I'll speak for myself. I'm a little bit shocked that we continue to have to ask people to have the message be ceasefire. We originally weren't going to make any signs that said that because we didn't think we'd need them long enough. That is still the main ask is a little bit shocking 5.5 months in here. But we'll keep saying it as long as we have to. And as you know, it's gotten larger than that, of course. There are more asks, more things that we need, and more things that we're willing to demand that maybe at first we were a little hesitant to, and we've realized that it's time. So that's a little more about what's happening. For some of these meetings we've had, some of you have been on them with the staff members. We have done something that is a little different. I've worked with the Friends Committee on National Legislation. We've had these Zoom meetings with staff in DC for a few years now. I think the most we ever had at those was maybe like 10, Chris. Does that sound about right to you? And at our last meeting with Shaheen's staff, I believe we had 37 constituents on it. So this is, I think, not really like much that they've seen before, certainly not from us. So we know we're sending a really strong message. It is a little bit hard to know behind the scenes. You know, these are people who aren't going to tell us if we change their minds, right? So we feel that we're doing some good work and plan to keep at it, not being sure quite where it will lead us next. I think at that, I might see if Tim wants to add anything to what I've said, and if he might have some questions to put out to the group. What do you think, Tim?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't have much to add to what you said in terms of an update, but I would just say that it's a slow process. It's relationship building, specifically with the legislative staff. But we're building these relationships in a time of crisis, obviously for us, and of course for the victims of the violence. And to some extent, a chaotic time for them as staff. So, you know, we're building these relationships. Maybe we're helping them a little bit, and we're just going to build on that. And I think it's, you know, whatever happens with this UN resolution, we're not in it for a ceasefire, right? This is a longer process of both what's going to happen in Palestine and Israel, and then continuing that relationship with these legislators on issues that might not, you know, be on the front page of the paper. But that may be just as important to some extent. In terms of questions, I mean, we only have about 10 minutes left. So I wanted to, if anyone had any questions for me or the work we're doing, I wanted to maybe open it up for that. The one thing I would add more immediate in terms of moving forward, and if you've all received our newsletter on Fridays, we are looking to see if people want to go to DC to do face-to-face lobbying and maybe some action. We've got about 8 people interested so far, and I'll just throw that, I'll plug that again. We're not yet committed to driving down there with a group of people, but if we have enough people who are interested and we can convene and find a place to stay, then it may just happen. And that's for April 14th and 15th, 16th. So look at the newsletter that was sent out on Friday, and there's a link if you're interested. And at that, I would just maybe give it back to Amy or open the floor to any questions or comments.
Bill.
Yeah, thank you, Tim and Amy. I just wanted to make a pitch for board members. Peace Action has, weathered the last few months, or I would say, more than 6 months, between losing our long-term director and hiring a new director, and then all of a sudden having, to respond to this horrible situation in Gaza. And, we have a really good working board that makes that happen. So I want to encourage anybody that's interested in joining the board to contact Tim or Amy, and we'll tell you about what we're doing and what the meeting schedules and things like that. But we also have a C4 board, and we're always looking for members for the C4 board. So just want to really encourage people to hop on and get active and be part of making this 42-year-old organization continue to be a voice for peace and for social justice and being able to end conflicts nationally, internationally, and locally in the way that we've been able to do it for all those years. So I want to put that out there.
Thanks, Bill. Some questions are coming into the chat, and maybe Bill, can you make sure to, or Bill or Tim, make sure in the chat there's a contact info for us. So if someone here is going, yeah, I did want to join the board, they know how to to reach us. I know not everyone here is from New Hampshire, but some of you I'm pretty sure are. There's some questions and comments. First, I do want to speak to Cora, who didn't realize we had done some work on the Peace in the Korean Peninsula campaign. And yeah, I do want to say that we have been very focused on Gaza, on Israel and Palestine, and I do think that will continue, but it's definitely not the only thing that we care about and want to expand, and keep an eye on and keep working on. And now and then those have made it into legislative alerts, not again as much lately, but we do have hope for between having more people join us and thus expanding our capacity to do things, and maybe at some point things in the world shifting in a way that will allow us to open things up again. We'll see. But yeah, that's a great point. There's a lot that we care about, a lot that we do want to do, and that is all very connected. I will mention that we have this year, over the past 6 to 12 months, made a lot stronger connections with folks in the climate and environmental movements. We see those things as deeply connected. Climate, militarism, nuclear issues, war making, these things to us are kind of like, of course, those are connected. But I think we've really, in the past year or so, made much better headway in explaining to others why they're connected. We currently now have 2 people who've joined our board who are employed at climate organizations, or organizations working on climate issues. So we feel really good about that. And around Earth Day, I think it's April 20th, we're going to be having a Concord rally for peace and the planet. A follow-up from our End War and Warming fall event. So yeah, we want to both continue a certain amount of focus, but also continue our work to make connections and build other coalitions, and keep on with the other critical things that need to be addressed. I want to speak to, okay, so then we have some questions. Wow, we only have 5 minutes left. This went so fast. I was saying earlier, maybe not many people will come and it'll go really fast and we'll end early. And I did also say that was probably crazy, and I was right about that. Which is wonderful. We're so glad to have folks yes, and Bill and participated with 350 New Hampshire in doing a climate and militarism webinar a couple weeks ago. So again, there are places that we are making even more friends and getting people to see our view of how these things are related. I do want to say that in terms of how we will focus our work once there is a ceasefire in place, what I'll tell you is that is a conversation happening in the coalition, and we welcome suggestions. We're not entirely sure. There's a few new campaigns coming online. One is the Reject AIPAC. AIPAC being the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee, I think. Yes, thank you. Which is getting a tremendous amount of press. Again, for some reason, I've been seeing this, really catching on. One of the really strong supporters and active groups is Jewish Voice for Peace, if I'm correct on that. And they have been doing some amazing work lately. We're very excited that a Jewish Voice for Peace group is really getting better established, I'll say, in New Hampshire. They're part of our coalition, and we've been really wanting to help support them. And if you are someone who wants to be a part of that, do let us know, and we'll connect you to the right people. So the Reject AIPAC, because that really also ties into another thing we think of as so important, and that is the democracy movement. The fact that money in politics is part of what means we don't get to have peace. We don't get to have human needs addressed instead of more weapons. We know that those sorts of systemic issues are critical. It's why we work so closely with groups like Open Democracy and New Hampshire Rebellion. And of course, we are the state of Granny D. So we understand these things are connected again. And that might be one direction to go, but it's in discussion, and it will continue to be, and we'll be interested in hearing from people what they think. What else here? I don't think we're going to have time to go much more into kind of like, JJ has this great question. What do we make about the US not vetoing the latest ceasefire resolution at the UN? And I don't think we can go deeply into that right now, other than to say it's a good question, and let's all be watching. Maybe Tim will say something about that in his Friday newsletter as we talk about it this week, because it is something. Not entirely sure what to make of it, but we will be talking about it. Yeah, we're almost at 8, so those of you New Hampshire Peace Action folks, anything that you feel you want to add on here before I do kind of wrap up? Tim?
I'll make a quick plug about peacekeeping. The New Hampshire Peacekeeping Project continues to do a lot of peacekeeping these days, and we are going to have a training coming up sometime in April. We'll put it in the news, a letter to let people know about it, but obviously we're in a kind of a fraught political environment the next several months, and a lot of attacks on the LGBTQ community and others, and so we're always looking for new peacekeepers. So if you want to get trained, then drop Doreen a message and say you're interested in getting trained, and we'll announce that training session shortly. It'll hopefully be in next 3 or 4 weeks.
Thank you, Bill. I'm sorry I didn't have time to circle back around to that before now. I will also mention that through the Peacekeeper program, a number of nonviolent action trainings and civil disobedience trainings have been happening, particularly in the Seacoast, with an eye to possible other sorts of actions around particularly Gaza. But of course, being trained in nonviolence is a good thing for everyone to do and revisit over and over. Incredible skills and history, and something that we in the peace movement, keeping all of that alive, is really, really always relevant. And if you are interested in participating in that sort of a thing, let us know too. Let me say and put a few things in the chat about upcoming programming. We didn't really speak about our educational offerings, but you all know, if you're here, that we have our Monday night programs every other Monday night. Most of them, like tonight, are recorded and go up on our YouTube channel that people can watch later. Let me also say that you can go to nhpsaction.org. You can find us on Facebook. We have ongoing events, and now we have a bunch of in-person events, which it had been a while. But know that if you're in New Hampshire, here are a few places you can meet some of us in person. Wednesday, March 27th is the next Dover Vigil. It's 2 to 3 p.m. And this week we're in front of Representative Pappas's office at 660 Central Ave. The following day, Thursday, March 28th, from noon to 1, a group will be in Concord in front of the city, or at the city plaza in front of the State House, 107 North Main Street. I also want to be sure to, again, mention that April 3rd, 7 to 9 p.m., Penn's Palestine Education Network's films continue. The Angel of Gaza and The Present will be shown those nights at that night at the Red River Theater, Concord, New Hampshire. We will continue on with a lot more programming. Go to our webpage to find out more. We also always welcome your donations. Almost everything we do is free. But anytime you can support us, it's great. As you've heard, we're doing a lot of work, and your support helps us keep at it. I'm going to ask Doreen not to shut the whole thing down because I want to be sure to save the chat, and I might talk to a few folks, but we're going to officially end. That's the word. End the program. Again,